Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, also known as the marketing podcast for podcasters. You ever seen that? You look on a criminal record, also known as, well, that's this podcast. You know it as Build a Big Podcast. Some people know it as Big Podcast, but it is also the marketing podcast for podcasters because that is what I do. My name is David Hooper, and my job is to help you grow your podcast audience, make people care about your message, help you make money with your message, spread your message, make impact with your message. If you want to do those things, you are in the right place, bigpodcast.com. That is the website. I've got a short episode. This is actually a test episode, and I'll tell you why right after I talk about this. This is something that came in the mail today, and by mail, I mean the postman, the post lady. I know my post lady. Do you know your post person? Tracy. Tracy delivered this to me today. And it was interesting because I knew the name on the envelope. It was handwritten, addressed to me and my wife. And I thought, okay, this is interesting because I know this lady. She's a real estate agent in Nashville. And you may have heard me talk about this. I have done a lot of local podcasting, and I believe the hyper-local podcast is where it's at, man, down to the neighborhood level. If you really want saturation with your podcast, the best way to do it is to have a hyper-local podcast. And this is perfect for somebody like a real estate agent because what do real estate agents want to do? Well, they want to dominate a market, man, dominate a neighborhood. If a neighborhood is hot, if it's got high-priced houses, they don't feel like driving all over town, there are a lot of reasons why a real estate agent will want to dominate a market. And for those that are interested in that, podcasting is great, a hyper-local podcast. Anyway, I met this woman through my hyper-local podcasting. Her name is Megan. I'm going to leave her last name off. And it's simply a card. It's like from the desk of Megan. It's on cardstock, and it says, "Dear David and Laurel." Laurel's my wife, by the way. "Just a quick note to wish you and yours a wonderful holiday season filled with love, family, health, and joy. All my best, Megan." By the way, this is in cursive. I had to tell this to a friend of mine. A lot of people under 30 can't read cursive, so maybe she knew my age, but if you're writing in cursive and trying to go for a younger demographic, they might be like, what? What is this? It has her name at the top. It has her email address at the bottom, and the email domain is blank-realty.com. It has her work phone number at the bottom. But it wasn't a pitch. And I thought that was so nice because I get a lot of postal mail from real estate agents. And it tries to be helpful, but it's also kind of transactional. These postcards or mailers, they'll say something like, "Here's what's selling in your neighborhood." Maybe there's a photo. "We just sold this in 3 days. Here's what's happening with the interest rates. The market is up 3%, whatever. And it's helpful, but it's also transactional. I get a lot of postal mail from real estate agents, and I get a lot of mail in general from people who want to do business with me. You, as a business owner, you're facing that same type of competition. And something like this, a handwritten note, that's going to go a long way. You may not be getting addresses on the people that you work with. If you're not doing that, moving forward, this is something that you should think about. Every person you interview, get an address. Send a thank you note. It can be simple, handwritten. "Hey, thanks for being on the podcast." That makes an impact these days because mailboxes across America, they are filled with real estate agents trying to get your business. They are not filled with thank yous from podcasters. I want you to think about somebody being a guest on your podcast. 95% of podcast interviews are done remotely, which means, we'll use me as an example. If you are doing an interview with me, I'm going to have the same experience doing this remote interview as I do with the next guy who's doing a remote interview with me. I'm in my 5x8 closet. I've got my mouth 3 inches from my microphone, and I'm staring at the wall. It is the exact same experience physically as the next guy. And most of the time as a guest, you're talking about the same topic, telling the same stories maybe. It's very, very similar. Now, emotionally, it may not be similar. And one of the ways for you to change that, get an address, send a thank you note. If you mention something like a book, something that would be easy to send, I really like this book. I think you'd really be into it. They say, "Yeah, really?" Send them a book. Send them something. Send them a gift card for Starbucks. I don't know. That can take it even further. Something that says, "Hey, thank you. I know your time is valuable. I appreciate what you did for me." Then, at the end of the year, you've got all these addresses. You follow up with a Megan handwritten note again. Thank you once again for a great interview. You really helped me to grow this podcast this year. And maybe go back to them. I don't know. But if I needed a real estate agent, if I didn't already have one, I would absolutely deal with this woman. She's great. Even though she did not hire me to produce her podcast. Handwritten notes. They still work, and they work because very few people are doing them. By the way, if you like the newsletter that I do, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, you hear me talk about that all the time, right? Because a lot of these episodes are audio editions of that newsletter. I also have a daily newsletter. That's at daily.bigpodcast.com. And holiday opportunities like this, direct mail and other holiday opportunities for your podcast, is exactly what I've been talking about this week. It's at daily.bigpodcast.com. It is free. You can go there now to read those articles. And if you want more, there's more coming. Thing I mentioned at the very top of this episode, this is a tester episode. There are some issues with compatibility of my feed. And I believe it has something to do with me using M4A files, which are hyper compressed. For the file size, they sound better than MP3. That's why I use them. But it's an Apple format. Apple changes things. Spotify changes things. Google changes things. Android changes things. I've been seeing some reports of this being a thing. I've had a couple of reports on it this week for myself. So this file that you are listening to, it's a different format. It's an MP3. Going back to MP3, at least for now. If you've had an issue getting the podcast, hopefully this is going to resolve it. If you haven't had any issues, I would love to hear from you. I'm always trying to play around with the best way to get my message out because I'm eating my own cooking. That's how I tell you the best way to get your message out. That's why people come to me. So I'm not afraid to jump in. Sometimes things work. Sometimes things don't work. Most of the time things don't work and you never hear about them. This is one of the things that didn't work. Maybe, I'm not sure this is the complete issue, that I'm bringing you along for the ride. You're watching sausage get made with me. It's not a big deal to change it. The reason that I'm going for the most compressed format that I can, because certainly I could give you a huge blown out MP3 file, but I'm thinking about listeners. And not all listeners are on high-speed connections. A lot of people are on mobile connections. Not everybody's in the United States. A lot of people are paying for data. I'm trying to save people money. I'm trying to save bandwidth. I'm trying to get the message out as quickly as possible. Because it's so small, it's the first to be downloaded, and it goes to the top of the list for people to listen to that day. That's the point of doing that, of course. That thing turns on its head when the file doesn't work like it's supposed to. So anyway, playing around with it. If you got thoughts on it, reach out to me via social media. Bigpodcast.com is another great way to get me. Thank you for listening. And since I don't have your address, let me give you a personal message, kind of. Fill in the blank here. Thank you. Insert your name. I do appreciate you listening to Build the Big Podcast this year. I've got some great things coming in the upcoming year. I've got a new book, knock on wood, that's coming out very soon. Actually, a couple of them. One of them sooner than the other. Both of them about podcasting. This first one is going to be a launch plan. So if you're looking to launch your podcast or relaunch your podcast, it started to cool down, you want to give it a little heat, that's going to be something to watch out for. Make sure you subscribe to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That is how to do it. You will never miss an episode, pending I get a file format that works for you. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. There are 3 buttons there, one for iPhone, one for Android. There's an RSS feed, and you can scan a QR code. You can automatically get this podcast hands-free. Don't get your hands dirty on the computer, man. Pull your phone out, scan the code, instantly subscribe as if you clicked one of those 3 buttons. Thanks again for listening to Build a Big Podcast, and I'll see you on the next episode.